As promised, some of my personal views on the Captain Tom Foundation and the connection with the money raised for the NHS by the Captain himself. Now, just to be clear, these are obviously my views, which I have deliberately separated out onto this channel because many people do want to hear my views and my opinions, but I thought it's only appropriate to separate them out to a different channel. So my personal view on this whole situation is, well, let's start first of all with some people making the assumption that the foundation raised the money, the sort of £38.9 million, which is not the case. The money raised for the NHS went to the NHS. This foundation was founded afterwards. And independently of the foundation, it seems, this planning application for the complex was put in the name of the foundation, although the foundation since said that it did not authorise its name to be used for the spa. But then also the intellectual property, as I've mentioned, the trademarks, all of the different trademarks, Walk with Tom, Captain Tom, Sir Tom, and so on, were all registered in the family business. And so to me, they were deliberately registered in that company name. They were knowingly registered in that company name, and as admitted in the interview with Piers Morgan, it is said to be the intention that that money was to remain in the family company and to remain with the family. All of which, just circling back, followed the fundraising for the NHS. Now, I don't think it's too much of a stretch of the imagination to say that all of this money was raised for the NHS. Then there was a realization, firstly, that this could be continued and money could continue to be raised and it could go to a lot of different causes and support a lot of different causes. But I don't think it's a stretch to say that it escaped the imagination of the family that they could make some money out of this as well. Indeed, it took some pressing by Piers Morgan and a break in the interview for them to then, it would seem, agree to disclose within the interview that all of the products that bore the Captain's name that were referred to before were indeed the books that were written. Now, having looked at all of the publications and all of the tweets and everything else that I've mentioned in my other videos, check those out on Black Barrister if you haven't seen them, but with all of the tweets and all of that information, it was quite clear to me that the publishing, the marketing, and everything to do with those books, ostensibly in the reasonable objective view of the public, was for charity, and that it was all for charity. Now, I do get the argument that the family would think that it was their grandfather and he may well have wanted them to keep some of the money or all of the money from the books. That may well have been the case. That's certainly what they've said the case is. Now, that may well have been the case. But the difficulty there is no one can now ask him the question. And obviously we have to rely on what's been said by the family to determine whether or not we think that is true or not, and compare that against the backdrop of all of the publications, which, again, just to emphasize, my view is that all of that was for the charity and not for the family. Now, I also get that a few people have said in response in comments to some of my videos that they didn't know and probably didn't care where the money went. They were just interested in his life story and wanted to buy those books that he'd written. Now, that's all fair enough. But I do think, and this is again my view, but I do think that those people are, with respect to you, I think in the very minority of percentages that would either not think about where the money was going or not care about where the money was going. I do think that most people buying that book would have believed that the money was going to charity. Indeed, all of the tweets and all of the marketing and everything else said that it was all written and published to help the launch of the foundation, to help the foundation even further, to raise more money and so on. So in my mind, I cannot, whilst I do always try to look at both arguments, I do always try to, and I've given you some arguments, I've given you some views for the family, and I've always put both arguments to you. But you're here for my opinion, and my opinion you will get. I personally cannot tie the two together without thinking that there's something just not quite right there. I personally cannot tie the two together and say that they didn't know that the public might have been misled. Now, just my opinion, based on everything that I've showed you, everything that I've discussed, everything that you've seen in the media, everything that you can read about for yourself to form your own views. If you disagree with me, that's fine. It just doesn't make sense to me that somebody at some stage wouldn't have said or thought that the general public might be misled into thinking that this money being raised was in fact going to the charity, when in fact it was going to the family business. So that's really my view. Now, the secondary view on the fallout from all of that, of course, is that it's tarnished his name. At least in many people's eyes it has, but I would urge anyone that does think like that just to cast your mind back and think of the 39 almost million pounds that was raised that went straight to the NHS. This was entirely direct, and it was all raised for the NHS, and so far as I know, there was no steps in between. So all of his efforts, all of his fundraising efforts in his name originally all went straight to support the NHS, which is what he was famous for, which incidentally is what I personally think the books sold for. I don't think they would have sold anything like as many books had it not been for all the media and publications surrounding the fundraising. He would have sold some books, probably. Of course, every book that is published stands a chance of being sold, but these books made up the majority of the some £809,000, which, again, I don't think it would have done but for all of the marketing, which, if I'm being completely honest, I think most people felt was in the name of the charity. There's my personal view. Disagree with it if you wish, and obviously please do research everything, read everything to make up your own mind. You don't need to rely on mine. And now this obviously has a knock-on effect on anybody donating to any charity. Everybody looks to how it's run, how it's governed, and everything else. Now, what I would say is that every charity runs essentially like a business. Yes, there are tax breaks being a charity, but otherwise, they do run as a business, and so they do need to have senior people involved to market and promote and direct the efforts of the charity. And of course, there needs to be careful control over the expenditure of said charity, and it does need a lot of staff involved. So I do know that when some people look into charities and how much they spend on all of the staff and everything else, they are quite staggered by how much is spent. But the flip side to that, of course, is that there are charity directors that have been prosecuted for fraud, which give all of those people very good justification for being very dubious as to what these charities do with that money. One of whom was featured, I think, The Secret Millionaire on, I think it was Channel 4, correct me if I'm wrong, I forget now, but because I don't watch TV, but one of the programs I read that he was featured on as a millionaire, and then subsequently, obviously with his charity on the TV show, but then subsequently was prosecuted for fraud. So that does give justification to anybody that's concerned about giving money to charities. But again, the original flip argument to that is that charities do a lot of good. So don't write charities out of your mind completely. Do choose your charities carefully and have a look where their funding goes. Because my concern is that this whole story has given charities in general a bad name, probably unfairly so. So there are my thoughts so far. Please do like the video and subscribe, because we're here on Black Belt Secrets for my personal views and opinions. And as always, thank you for watching.